first.
All right, then. So, welcome back to Portal Mountain Development Meeting number probably 57 or 58. No, I don't really know. But we skipped. We had other things to do the last week, so we're kind of glad to be back.
Yeah, we try to do it every 2 weeks, but it's organic in nature.
Just happens. Yep. And oftentimes, of course, we're not strictly planned on what's going to happen. Usually we try to carry off where we last were, which last time it was just a couple of interviews we did with Igor and Dustin. They're just kind of like the kind of typical historical discussions about, Greece and like different spiritual systems and history of humanity, the pseudo-history and all that. So this time we want to, ideally, this is kind of an idea rolling around, is kind of recap Portal Mountain again. Like what I want to do specifically is touch very briefly on a number of main points and purposes that have that kind of would come together, are coming together to make this book that's being written, the Portal Mountain Quest for Coherence, or whatever the title be, and just to be able to touch on these different topics and speak about how they flow, their interconnection, why they matter. That's what I really want to get to, because I think that can be lost so easily.
Like why that's the arc.
Why are you even talking about this? Why does this matter? So for that we need the interconnections, right? And yeah, so we were going to start with the soul, the zeitgeist, the charlatan, coherence, temperament. Presumably we can just kind of go through, use the table of contents as a guide as it exists so far. Pardon me. And yeah, so as an intro, like the premise here is that, say whatever you want to call it, 10,000 years ago, when civilization itself was forming, we were having this problem of reification coming up, especially when written language was coming about, when you're having symbols able to be drawn and to have meaning bound to those symbols.
Well, there's a few events that drove that situation to be the case.
Right.
There is a reason why it's 10,000 years ago, and there's a reason why those symbolic forms started to appear the way they did.
Right. And so this is the story of grain.
Yeah.
And alcohol.
Grain, alcohol, and any other real crop that's been picked up as the initial starting point.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few.
Yeah, so for an introduction to a book, like, I think we should touch maybe even very lightly on the story, like give this a slight story of, like,
chronology.
A chronology. We want to give a premise that people can latch onto as to positioning themselves. Where am I in space and time right now? What is my history, my pseudo history? What has happened to me, which is causing the problems that I feel? The problems I feel is this. We get into the soul and the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah. So
but there's a reason it came there.
I can fill out the details for chronology as necessary.
The question is, would we be getting into that in detail at the introduction? Like, you just want a tiny thing.
I mean, if you're setting up the context for why we're going for soul as the first point of the strike, the arcs, the lightning strike, if you will,
like, right,
then
the feeling
then
something is
wrong.
wrong.
I think that context of exposing the chronology will point to the wrongness that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It might.
Yeah, like, I feel like I want to right off the bat give a picture of like the understanding and the answer, if you will, the correct response to it. I want it up front, just so that then it can be in your mind and developed as you go on. You can. So it doesn't have to make perfect sense.
The book is an answer. What is the question, right?
Sort of, yeah. Like, what is our history? So we're talking about the problem,
right?
Basically, the problem of reification. You can
so would you like me to go over the big overarching theme of chronology to get into it, so that we can at least set up a rudimentary context?
So, and we're setting up for something being missing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and we're with the chronology, we're introducing the market, basically, the counting, the problem of numbers and counting.
And what it's replacing.
Right. It's replacing the sense,
The gift.
the sense.
Gift economy.
Right, that too, right. But the numbers themselves are kind of, this is the problem of reification of the number on top of the world around us. We're no longer sensing.
All right.
We're just running calculations.
Then
right?
I'll touch on that, and it's basically the problem of counting that you're referring to, and where that emerged, and how it emerged, and what it changed since its emergence in our capacity to socialize as a species, as a unified species.
So we're starting with the fields opening up.
Right. So the story is essentially that.
After the ice age.
And this is a rough draft of the story. It's not like meant to be taken as a scientific exposition in itself, but there are scientific studies that point in this direction, and they're not, let's say, in the popular realm of thought when it comes to the professionals and all of that, but that's because the idea itself was new to it, and it is in some kind of conflict with established notions about progression. For example, one of which is that assumes that most of our civilized progress happened due to initial competition in the natural world for resources. Like that story is what's being challenged, which is a very ubiquitous story.
and it's like, we have the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and the Industrial Age, and it's getting better and better.
Right.
And it's all about these little technologies, but that's not really that's not how you explain human behavior as a series of technologies.
Yeah. So the challenge in this framework is that it goes against the established gospel truth, if you will, about how human civilization developed. And what it's saying is that when the Ice Age receded, the landscape for humanity had shifted into exposing significant amounts of grasslands across the planet. So wherever you had humanity left over from the Ice Age, which is already migrated across the world at that point, you now have a much more abundant situation with the grass fields where they can collect a crop with impunity, essentially. Like a huge abundance of a single resource, if you will. Which was not the situation before that time, where you have all the nomadic migrating tribes following whatever food sources that they are perpetually inclined to follow.
Yeah. Interestingly, with alcohol, you have kind of an obvious reward.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
If you work in my field, will you get this as a reward, kind of?
So that's the secondary element. You mentioned alcohol, but it's
Feast
actually
economy, right?
It's actually got to do with narcotics in general. In that the very first reason why these plants were cultivated were because they allowed human beings to, for the first time, create their not hallucinogenic, but intoxicants on a mass scale. Mm-hmm. So, if you backtrack again to before the fields opening up, that kind of substance would have been not in high demand, but a lucrative sort of object that you only get every so often through putting in a lot of effort into making it, right? And so it would have been like a very ceremonious endeavor.
Yep.
Right? It would take a lot of time to prepare, and you'd have to prepare the time for it to utilize it in a safe setting. You would have to legitimize the usage of it for that setting, so that whatever stories or whatnot, the outcome of that is related back to your tribe There's just like a whole bunch of different things that surround intoxicants and ritual that would have made it a very significant element of the tribal life. And now we have a situation where you can produce an intoxicant on a mass scale in one go. That's where the birth of the feast economy starts, in which you can invite others into partaking of an abundant intoxicant. Now, the reason it's about the intoxicant and not, say, food supply is because at that stage you have a nomadic kind of people who very much understands that staying in one spot can mean a significant problem, like droughts and any of that. Like, you can't call a field like that reliable because it's susceptible to drought. So the very first peoples that would have come across these things would have utilized them for sure when they were available, but would not have relied on them as a stable food supply, simply because they could not trust that field to be there the next year. So,
that wouldn't last for very long.
So at that time, at the very beginning of this time, you will have a situation in which they will use that for alcohol and all of these kinds of quick and not to mention that alcohol is a way to preserve something. So,
right. I wonder if we're going into a bit too much detail here, because there's no way we're gonna.
I want to build up the story so that you understand where the lack starts, because now when you reach this stage where you have a nomadic people who only utilize it for a feast economy at whatever years they're available on, you also start to have a situation of communicating about the fields, and you'll have a situation in which somebody has more control over the field and delegating work on the field to others. That delegation causes a kind of a usury sort of flow of relating to one another. So the idea being is that one tribe gets like a prime location, if you will, that has an ability to work the field, and everybody is fine with that, because every harvest, everybody can come in and partake in the feast.
Okay, here's an interesting part about that.
Then some generations pass.
The fact of having something like feastability, with like alcohol, various intoxicants, those are immediately recognized as commodities, basically, among tribes, among even enemy tribes. They would recognize this as a value. So if you have land, which is your base of power and existence, if you have land that now suddenly can create drugs and alcohol, that becomes something. It's more than just a power for its own self, for your tribe and your people.
It's valuable to others.
It becomes a power that projects.
Yeah, it's valuable
outwards.
to others.
And once you have this, so this may be like one of the first commodities. Then you're having where you'll have tribes that are warlike and are trying to take over those bases of power because of their external trade uses.
So you have that situation, which is probably a little bit later. But before you even get to there, you'll probably have a situation in which one tribe, just by the nature of its location, lucked out on being the primary
They'll figure out how to market it.
owner of said field, and the other tribes are friendly and whatever, and they keep inviting these other tribes over to the feast whenever one is possible. And eventually there is, like, say a few generations move, and now you have a sense of all these people disconnected from the origin of this circumstance.
And they're just there for the field.
Being born into being the quote-unquote de facto owner of said field, negotiating the feasts with the other tribes who are still friendly. And then an idea might pop up to participate in the feast. Like, why don't we keep working on the field and keep giving it to you. How about you do some of the work so that the portion that you partake in the feast is earned at the table? Do you see what the shift is becoming? A trade.
Yeah.
So the gift economy is now transforming itself into a trade economy, and the trade economy already existed in other circumstances, but within enemies. Now this is internalizing the enemy dynamic within the civilization, within the community itself, with regard to other friendly tribes. And that's not necessarily seen
Because
explicitly.
if you were a friendly tribe, you would think, according to
course.
the spirit, like everyone who shows up gets something, right?
Yeah, like, so you sacrifice and you get a sacrifice. On it goes. So it seemed like a legitimate idea. Okay. That was a few generations. Now let's move a few generations past. Now you've been in that tit for tat situation since forever.
Yep.
For as long as you can remember. So any digression from the established terms now become violations of rules.
This makes me kind of think, like, I wonder how much we should be elaborating on gift economy. And just because I think people are very familiar with the market economy, but they think, probably most of us would think, that that's the way it always was, always has been, always will be, right? The idea of a gift economy doesn't make any sense. But so I'm having a feeling like an introduction to even the family, like, how could a mother charge her newborn, you better get a job, or no milk and all that kind of stuff, right? Like the economies have existed in parallel forever. It's just that it's shifted so far to the market side of things, where everything is a mechanical calculation, rather than a kind of holistic sort of.
Yeah, I've only been trying
availability.
to point the trajectory of going from the natural state of things to it being a mechanical calculation, not necessarily going
Right.
for what is what.
It's important that we
But that
outline
arc.
this, because it has to be known that it has to be established that there are different systems that we've been moving to and from
Right.
over time.
So
Right.
what I've tried to do is to try to arrive in from a situation where we don't have things like owners and managers and workers, how it could potentially progress by the opening up of the fields, step by step, from the natural state of things into the artificial
Yeah.
situation.
So we're kind of trying to outline how plausibly it could have happened where we came to be in this market situation.
Right.
So that we can open up the possibility of not returning to the past, but being aware of other types of interaction, shapes, forms, other forms of interaction.
So I didn't really make this explicit in my explanation, but did you notice what got left behind in that progression?
No.
The people. So you notice it became about the fields, about the the transaction of the intoxicants, the feasts, at the expense of the people that live those lives. Their lives become less meaningful, the feasts become more meaningful, and so we have an abstraction running away from the people's participation in that abstraction. And now with that, I'll be back.
Just shared the link there. Yep, it's gonna be a noisy one today. But that is okay. So yeah, the purpose here is to kind of, I guess, outline the origins of the problem, as we call it, the problem of reification. How did society come to depend so much on numbers and calculation, as opposed to qualities. So we have numbers standing in for quality. And I suppose the arc of the book is sort of how to identify what's existed before, what we're dealing with, what we're working with, identifying the ego and its market, how that's kind of usurped in a natural sort of way, but also in a, you could say, unnatural due to lack of any kind of medicine for dealing with ego structures, allowing them to dissolve, to dissipate, to come to their conclusions. So that's through medicine, and coming around to organization. How do we tease out the kind of organizational forms and structures, what in their essence was happening pre-market, in the prehistorical tribe life and that kind of stuff, gift economy, that kind of stuff. What was happening there that we can, what parts of that can we bring forward in a way that doesn't trigger the ego and its market for punishment? So we're trying to bring those forms, tease them out of the prehistoric past, and bring them into a contemporary context in such a way that the system won't squash it. Basically, right? That's talking about the membrane.
Yep.
The guild membrane and all that kind of stuff, the trade membrane.
Trade is the guild membrane, which is literally lines up with what we were talking about, how on the one side we have a gift economy, and then a trade economy manifests itself from within, and thus and it existed before as a mechanism between enemies, like I give you my gift, we trade in gifts. It's still a kind of a gift economy, but trade in gifts, that got internalized inside the actual tribe, which as a consequence gave a situation of enemies within the tribe.
Right. So that we're looking to create almost kind of bubbles of protected space that just emerge, and together the bubbles form a foam, which is kind of like the guild.
Yeah. Bubbles of being, let's call it that. Existing. So
Yeah.
So, to tie it back to lack, I was saying that the human being was the one neglected, that their personal narratives, the narratives that used to be the components of the entire tribe, became negligible, and the tribe's narrative overtook that, right? With the trade economy. So that negligence of the human being in the face of the social system that's forming, that disconnect, is the quality that is felt through all moments of experience. And that equality is the soul. So, soul here, to tie it back into more meaningful context, is simply our way of taking over the word, and to keep the old connotation of the word of it needing of a rescue. What we're saying
to save
is
your
that,
soul.
Right. What we're saying is that this hole, this neglect, this gap in the process of the social system with the new, normal, natural, human internal operating system, that disconnect, the lack of its representation.
Here we go again with the network issues. We'll see how it goes.
That lack of its representation in the social and operating system is the quality of neglect.
Lack of what representation?
So your social operating system stops representing the neural operating
Yeah.
system within itself.
Right. Yeah. And so that's like how you can be identified as a worker and treated as a worker in your relations with the boss and all that. But meanwhile, you're not you yourself. Who you are and what you are inside is completely glossed over. This is the problem. This is the root. This is the dawn of the problem. Right.
That attitude towards other people.
That we can slap a label and go no further beyond that. You are your label, sort of thing, and that's we treat each other this way. So
Like
that's
being a criminal, or being black, or being male, or being anything.
Yep. Right.
So that's like the seed of that kind of thinking, and the seed of the soul, and the reason for why anything is in need of rescue to begin with.
So
Now-
we're telling a sort of plausible story, which we're saying isn't not that it happened as said, but that it's a plausible pseudo history that we can say this type of thing was bubbling up everywhere, where certain commodities, their power and their value ended up becoming a focus in itself, and the people were left behind.
Right. They became less represented by the very social language that they used.
Right.
So, to tie it all off, since this commodification process also gives rise to an experience of lack for every given experience, the collective experience of said society is now sitting in a zeitgeist of that same lack.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nebulous lack because it is felt different for different people, differently for different people. But as a whole, the sense of lack is the zeitgeist of the entire society. And we see this in literature over and over and over again. Everything from the religious of saving our souls to the philosophical of having the Ubermonk and progressing from what we are to somewhere else. Something is missing in every single one of these expositions.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
That there's a path to a higher plane. That there's a segue from where we are at with what we have.
Yeah, it's any philosophy and all, like even religions and all that. They're all pointing towards that there's something isn't right. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. It's like their purpose for speaking up is to identify this problem, what's going on.
Now, on top of that, they all wind up being charlatans.
Right. I wanted to mention, I think...
Because they piggyback on that notion, yes.
I think charlatanism, you could say, was the first profession. Because how would you have a whore without the pimp?
Who is also the whore.
Right. Well, there's kind of, but you know what I mean. Like the charlatan was there from the beginning, and it must have felt awkward or bad to be like, I know I'm treating you like a piece of meat by giving this label.
It's not even like that. It's charlatanism isn't exactly explicit to the charlatan itself. They might not be even aware of their role.
Yeah.
So a charlatan can be just somebody who's misinformed about the system, perpetuating it.
That's true,
the
but
gain is how it's supposed to be.
When I think about and this is kind of offensive to some people, but to say that the priest class was like the first, you could say, among these first charlatans, and one of the most powerful, and powerful because they knew exactly what they were doing, right? That's... The other charlatans are just kind of stooges for the priest class.
No, I think they're also pretty obfuscated. Because nobody thinks of themselves as the evil agent in whatever story they're making.
Fine, but there's got to be degrees of knowledge of inner workings of reification and all that, of reality.
The degrees of hostility.
Right, yeah.
So charlatanism can be adversarial.
So I'm talking about the callous.
Yes.
The ones who know how it is, but they don't care, sort of. They go along with it because that's the way things are,
No,
I guess.
now that they don't care, they won't care. They think it's the wrong way. They're indifferent they're indifferent to anything but the transactional. So ego and pure ego only, entirely mechanical existence.
Right. And you gotta wonder how much of that can ever be self-aware. Really not.
Well, if it's actively being buried.
Right. Yeah, and it is a weird thing to try and become aware of that, to become enlightened, if you will. It's basically a miracle. It doesn't matter how much you study, how much they would study reality or the being or who am I.
There's also there is that point of Dark Night of the Soul where if you were to give up on your notions of reality without any kind of fallback, you got nowhere else to go, and so all you get out of that is more punishment.
And so that's recognized as a major pitfall, one to avoid. And so without even unconsciously, you would be avoiding that with like tooth and nail, fighting that revelation.
Right. So part of the fighting the revelation is to avoid the Dark Night of the Soul, having no recourse.
Just knowing, like having an itch in the back, like you know that something's.
And then the other thing is that the fear of the Dark Night of the Soul may prevent one from seeking the recourse, believing there is none. So yeah.
So that I kind of wanted
it's
to.
A pickle.
The reason I bring that up is because charlatanism, it's coming right at the very start of the book, even of the book arc.
Yeah.
And so it's something that was happening right away at the very start. As soon as you had people interacting with this sort of market trade of the fields of alcohol, you know, you do this, I do that.
As soon as there is a zeitgeist, it can be commodified, right? Oh, that feeling? Let me represent that feeling as a product that could satisfy that feeling. This is where the charlatan comes in. It takes the outcome of the transactional nature of the market, which it causes, and sells it right back on the market as a form of alleviating this quality.
I could imagine workers.
Since it doesn't solve anything, it keeps going and going and going.
I could imagine
to be sold again and again.
Workers on the field being finding themselves sort of not really profiting per se, and finding themselves on the lower end of the totem pole, and starting to be filled with anxiety because you've disconnected from the tree of life, from your tribe, from the normal ways of getting food and all that, and you've kind of jumped into this artificial system. I could imagine the charlatan saying, "Hey, you know what helps with that? Have a beer." Like, and honestly, believing that, like, hey, it helped me. I have a beer, every day and all that, or whatever, at the end of every day. Feels great. You're gonna love this life.
And this is why drugs never left us. Because it became, first of all, the source of the production process, and then the goal of the production process, so that you can numb the consequences of the production process. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a positive feedback loop.
Can't remember if it was an Arnie movie, but it was about there's a like drug operation in like Central America or something, and they were going in and taking these boats and all this, and I think it was like a cartel setup.
Commando.
But I just remember they had this one guy like sitting there like with his headphones on, like just tweaked right out on whatever they were producing, and just sitting there like dancing on, like almost like you would dance on grapes, but they're producing like some other drug, but the guy was just like tweaked right out. Just like
sounds like a very old movie.
I think he was captured or something, but some captured white guy. So that's all he did was just sit there dancing with his headphones on.
Nice. Not sure if that's relevant, but nice.
Yeah, that's how you cope, maybe, like,
Okay,
or
yeah.
control people, cope.
Yeah. Yeah. This is how you make people forget that they're part of a
Right,
system.
yeah, make the whole drugs as an avenue to this makes even more sense in that light. As being the first kind of commodities that could actually pull people in and away from their family, from their tribe, into this artificial thing as well. If you have a way of, yeah, there's now you got a soul, but hey, here's some drugs.
Yeah, let's fix that soul. Oh wait, it's still there.
I got
Okay, a little more
something for
drugs.
that. Yep.
Oh, maybe this other
Exactly.
drug will help it better. It's not the fact that you are miserable. No.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's the charlatan arc. It takes advantage of the zeitgeist, and then we move into.
Did we connect those really well though?
Did you understand the connections?
Imagining history, I just don't know if it was.
Do you intuit the connection though, like how the whole trading mechanism gives rise to impersonal trading? Everything can be now shuffled off to this other medium, and this new medium now becomes the holy grail of what happens.
Yes. I'm just trying to reflect back to our established table of contents, kind of. And so,
Well, what's next?
well, so we've just gone through the kind of a brief chronology of like how do we get uprooted from our tribes and our families into this market economy where our needs are being met through the market, right? And you become just an agent with a name and a bank account.
By met you mean met.
Met, quote unquote, yes.
If you have enough money, they can be met. If not, fuck out of luck.
Right. And so the more rich, you could say the more rich and powerful, the less soul you have. But there's always going to be something missing. There will always be the soul, will always be there.
Well, if it's still only fulfilled artificially, it's still there. It's just beaten down more,
You still like
hidden more.
every interaction you have with people is still dead eyes.
Yeah.
They're not lighting up for you. There's a pain to that, knowing that it's like a machine world, machine interaction.
And it also prevents you from seeing people as people too.
Right.
You treat them as machines.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and naturally through like mirror neurons and all that, you're feeling the pain of that. Like you know what it's like to be treated that way, even though you're treating someone like it, right? So, but yeah, the soul as being that personal feeling of lack of these interactions now that we've been put into this artificial environment.
On the balance sheet, yeah.
Every interaction just feels empty and hollow.
Like imagine if all your interactions have to go through a literal balance sheet.
Yeah.
What if you had to do that explicitly?
Right.
That's where the feeling of like, what the fuck am I doing is coming from.
Because, and this is really
That's there.
this is the origin of. Also, we're talking about the origin of the mind-body disconnect. The idea that you, as a label, can be disconnected from you as an internal your feelings, what's going on with your body.
And I was saying that in a different way when I was talking about how your operating system on the social layer stops reifying the neural operating system on the neural layer.
Right.
When that reification stops, representation of it stops. Of course, there's a disconnect because there's no representation.
Yeah, exactly. So mind-body disconnect. We've got neglect through reification.
Or lack of thereof.
Reification without feedback, or however you would say it. Projection.
Certain things don't make it back up to the upper layer of the mythology.
Did we call this projection before? Did we have a term for it? Like, I know reification. Reification is fine if there's an upload again, right? A download and an upload.
A projection is like a forced reification. So
right.
you could be doing something over here, but it's going to be interpreted.
You're trying
different.
to resonate into others. Your view, I suppose. That would be projection. Yeah, so we have the birth of the problem. We could just
like
call it the
forcing the
problem.
semantics. When you project, you're forcing the semantics. So if you use different semantics than I do,
Yeah.
and you say something, I'm going to say, you said this based on my semantic
Yeah.
understanding, and just fiat lay you down like what you said didn't actually exist at all, but
Yeah.
my version of what existed,
Right.
how you said it, is the truth.
And this is yet again another kind of nuance of how the neural OS is not being reflected in the social OS. Because the way we're interacting with each other is as if we don't have an inner experience, right? We all have an ongoing experience of learning of reality, our own reality, but also everyone has their own
And so
ongoing process of reality
so
creation.
everybody interacts through projection rather than through.
So if
any
you
of
miss that completely, again, mind-body disconnect. This is the problem of meaning.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's the problem of meaning, because what I said means something totally different than to you.
Right.
But that difference in meaning becomes a problem.
Right. So we can say that,
And obfuscation. This is obfuscation right there and then.
so we need to be able to set this up. The soul is directly related to this event happening, this disconnection of the mind from the body, this lack of representation of the neural operating system in the social.
The soul is a symbol that captures that situation.
Right.
The lack of representation, like the missing bit,
Yeah.
the experience.
And
of
we
that
call
is
it
what we call
we
soul.
call it neglect as well, right? That being reified upon without.
Neglect is more like the technical reason for the experience, whereas the soul is the quality itself, the felt aspect, the stuff you can't put a word to.
Right.
Neglect is like trying to capture that word, but not really, just trying to say what happened as to why that
Right.
feeling materialized.
It materialized because there's something missing, but it's not like a thing you can point to exactly.
So it's like a punishment without a source. So
Right.
So there is like a constant tethering to a pain situation that is perpetual because of it. Alright, I gotta.
Right. Well, let's take a short break here. We've been going for almost 45 minutes. Yep. Be right back. back in business. All right. So yeah, I just before we continue proceeding on through the book, I guess, and the point made, I wanted to say like, okay, but in the introduction, I want to give the goods. Like this is kind of something that's been in my mind. Like I don't want to lead the reader on being wondering like what direction we're going in. I want to say like, yes, there's a problem of reification, and here's like our approach to this is to give a model, an image, a vision of what we are as meaning processors. Like
before we say it's our approach, we should give credit where credit is due.
Oh, of course.
This is not strictly
and
ours.
that helps us too, even to say like a lot of it's based on Buddhism and all that. There's many sources.
It's a reification of an existent approach in a completely different medium.
Modern
because,
context.
Yeah, because the mythical mindset has gone the way of the dodo.
Right. So
we
then
have to utilize the mindset that is today, which is the modern mythology, which is closer to professionalism.
to your point, though, then we have another kind of obligation, I guess, or we'd be questioned like, okay, but do they really understand the original texts?
Right.
Did you read in the original language?
And that's fair. And the answer to that is if you find the same situations, contextualizations in both, and they tend to parallel each other, then this is going to be your answer. Some key points I can allude to is that in the Buddhist system, specifically in the Abhidhamma, so that's like the most technical rendition of Buddhism you can get, which is fucking a mindfuck to itself.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I was talking about, the machine. What is a meaning machine?
You start to find the parallels that our model has brought in different language. So that whole idea of moments stringing together into a narrative composed of moment by moment situations that are tied together. You'll find a similar depiction of what's called the thought moment, the moment of consciousness, in which contact with the sensory system is made. That contact gives rise to a sense object. That sense object then drives the decision-making process. The decision-making process then
partly drives. It's added to the meme
kind of like commits a transaction onto the narrative, if you will, of this has happened, and therefore it sends off a causal element to the rest of the system.
And this is like the brain chart stuff.
This depiction in this depiction in Buddhism and our depiction of it in here are mirror images of each other. The difficulty is it's not like a one-to-one image, and so some elements that exist there aren't depicted in our image, and our image does not and some elements of our image are not depicted there because they're meant to paint the same picture for a different audience,
different context,
different audience specifically, because the audience for that picture doesn't believe in the spiritual apprehension of the animistic element of the world. So how do we reintroduce that back?
Right.
So in a more technical way. So we do have the animism that arises there. We do have the moment to moment and dreamlike or delusion-like depictions. What we don't have is like a symbology between, say, the rooster, snake, and pig representing ignorance, greed, and delusion.
Right.
Like, we don't have those kinds of symbolic representations because those are meant for much more mythologically or fantasy style understandings of the world that you're living in.
Not to mention what we, I guess, identify as the four major schools or directions of Buddhism. which
all-
is for completely
are all
different
ref-
temperaments, which in which some is would be more accustomed to real world imagery, as in the kind of upper psychedelic stuff, and others who are like want to just be given the science and sort of facts of the existence of things and objects and how they interact or whatever.
Right, and others disregarding all of that and just give me like, okay, so how do you process this? Like, what's the step?
Right.
the
What
step
should
by
I actually
step?
do? Like, forget all that. I don't care what it is. Tell me just what are my heuristics here? What am I watching for? And then what do I do?
With it? Yeah.
That's it.
Without getting
Right.
into
Then
the-
that's yet another temperament, another school of Buddhism, right? The Zen.
and then the main one is what's the role model should I follow? What is the that image of perfection to actually reach out
as if
for?
this is a very expedient means. Expedient as in like just tell me what to do, tell me what to watch for and what to do. That's kind of like the pragmatic side. This is like tell me who I should be like, simply. Like it's like a shortcut.
Yeah,
Give me
an example of that person already.
Right.
What do they do that I can copy?
Right. And that's just as expedient as a protocol.
Right.
When this happens, do that.
That's why we call it a temperament. It's because of what you're susceptible more to. A temperament is a disposition, right? It's like if you do it this way, you have a much higher percentage of like success if you were to measure it that way.
And again, regarding temperament talk, all temperaments exist within each other.
Right.
We're talking more of a dominance or a preferred filter, sort of your go-to way of experiencing reality.
Preferred phrasing.
Sure.
It's as simple as that.
And
the preferred way to phrase something. Because if you phrase the same thing a number of different ways, you didn't phrase different things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which is why
Right. It's
it
still the
doesn't
same
matter
topic.
it doesn't matter which temperament
So
is being approached.
interestingly, this comes up in the first section of the book. I think it's after coherence. So it goes soul, zeitgeist, charlatan, coherence, and then temperament.
All right. Well,
That's our bootstrap for the book.
So let's talk about coherence briefly, so that the temperament discussion can actually be understood much more cleanly. So temperament discussion is actually
Sure, yeah.
They can be in parallel. So the temperament discussion discusses
And-
approaches. Coherence describes affinity, like how like the role model.
Do you think this does give a microcosm of the book? Because like I wanted to just mention that idea again of delivering the goods in the introduction itself, of saying, okay, we're going to look at what is this meaning machine that's doing meaning.
Yeah.
Right.
So we started off with chronology that discusses why shit gets the way the fuck up looks.
Yeah, because you can't get to the soul without chronology.
With the charlatan, with then what is the fuck up?
This will help. Have some beer. It will fix everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And coherence is what is actually can be done about the fuck up. So the fuck up is essentially
That's good connection.
incoherence. The charlatan increases the incoherence, but coherence is the path forward
Right.
out of it.
Okay.
With
So-
temperament being
Hold on.
gateways into that coherence.
Right. Of how to
Tap into
how to be
it.
presented and engage with it.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. Interesting. Charlatanism is hostility. We've already
Oh,
identified
absolutely,
that.
yes.
So what we're doing here is breaking from hostility into coherence.
Not just hostility section, neutral, not quite hostile, but not coherent.
Sure.
That's
A repeating of patterns.
it's like the blank slate situation of like, okay, you made a claim, now sell me on it, what you've said so far. I just don't have enough to go on. So there's that form of
Interesting. Okay. That's good to note. And this probably speaks to the bridge that can be made, that where hostility, you can still come to coherence anyways. But I thought it was interesting how